Cool. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for playing a role in the second annual Techno Evil event. Obviously, a slightly different event from the year prior. This is online based, and now we're focusing on the Q&A from the recorded sessions that we took earlier on in the summer, and people have had a chance to watch that, be able to digest it, and subsequently ask me questions of you of the topics that were covered. And I wanted to take this as an opportunity not only to thank you for your personal involvement, but also to get maybe deeper insights into the points that you raised, either yourself directly or others might have raised as well within the context of what we did. And this year we broke it up into two areas. We talked about tech for good, and we also talked about tech in the COVID space. I think that that's pretty pertinent to all that we're dealing with here. And the questions kind of expand, on that conceptually, but jump around. And so what I've done is I've tallied the questions, and I'm going to ask each and every one of you an individual question that's more focused on the topic and conversation that we had. And answers that you gave, but it's an open dialogue for everyone here on the call to participate in. And then I also have some questions that are more general and talk about holistically what we spoke about that aren't focused on any one particular perspective, point of view, or job that you are doing or have done in the past. So with that in mind, if you could just please introduce yourself, tell the group kind of your background in tech and what you do. Clearly they know this from the video as well, but for those that haven't watched it, if you can give people just a quick intro into yourself and your background, that would be great. And we'll start with Aaron Filius.
Hi everyone, I'm Aaron Filius, founder of Promotable. So we're a workforce accelerator that focuses on closing the data skills gap. My background in tech, so I was one of those people that kind of had a late entry into tech. I went to grad school for something else, made a really hard pivot, ended up working at some ed tech companies, coding boot camps out in San Francisco. Saw a lot of good work that, coming out, spending a lot of money in grad school, and then coming in and seeing, oh, there are these companies that actually help you get a skill that actually, matters for work. And also that, they put their finances behind it. Really kind of changed the game, and I've kind of been looking to try and continue that conversation really with in terms of finding like when you're learning for a purpose, and also stuff that actually matters.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for being with us. Now, not to distract from the other Aaron, I guess we'll jump on over to Ashley Connell. If you could please just introduce yourself and your background, please.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Ashley Connell, founder of Prowess. My background is B2B tech marketing. I did that for about 15 years. Then woke up one day and was very worried how I was going to manage both a career and having children. So I built Prowess to solve my future problem. We help companies find expert talent. The way we do that is we vet and certify women who are pivoting in their career, returning to the workforce, etc. The way that we do that is we built out an EQ, emotional intelligence, based job matching platform. So it looks at, of course, the skill and expertise of the talent, but also communication style, learning style, behavior style, compatibility with the incoming team.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. And we'll move over to the other Aaron now, please. Aaron Fazulak, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Aaron Fazulak. I'm the former co-founder of Designation, which was a UX design bootcamp based in Chicago. Based on my experiences in technology, I started off at Ernst & Young as an accountant, but transitioned into forensic accounting and got to work with some pretty cool technologies where we would come up with data and evidence of corporate corruption, and then we'd create storyboards, which is a technique used in user experience design to make a case towards a conviction. From there, I went on to start Designation, which it was the first UX design bootcamp of its kind. And we grew that program for 6 years, and it was acquired by WeWork in 2018. Along the way, I got to work on this really cool project. I've been in the wearable space as well. We created a device that detects head impacts throughout the course of a football game. And that actually, we got to actually go on Conan O'Brien and show off that application. And we had letters of recommendation and letters of purchase and intent from Michigan State and Ohio University and a bunch of cool places. So it's been fun to be in the wearable space, but I would say primarily focused on the education space.
And Art, thank you for joining in. I hope your knee is better. I know that you had surgery just after our first interview earlier on this summer, and we're using this. We've only just got started. If you could just kind of give us an introduction to yourself, your background in technology, which I know is wide and varied, because we're going to get started here before we get and dive into the questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Art Norman, Channel 5 News, NBC News. I've been here at Channel 5 almost 40 years, but my background in technology goes all the way back to historically Black college education. I was a math physics major at an HBCU, like a Howard University or like a Morehouse, but my school is Johnson C. Smith University. I'm the former president of the National Association of Black Journalists. What we do is mentor young Black minds to get into technology ASAP. I remember sitting down with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and what they did was they put some scholarship money together for African-American students who got the grades to go to college, but not the money. So we bridged that digital divide using the CEO types of technology, and they came into the fold, and now a lot of young kids are in college or graduates from college actually working in the media, but we opened those doors and we let everybody know that it was us that did it. And the us I'm talking about is Steve Jobs. And I remember when Steve Jobs first came to NBC, he said, Art, he was just touting a phone called the Newton. It was a revolutionary phone and tablet. And he says, I said, is that gonna work? He says, this is the future. This is the future, Art. He looked at me and Charlie and said, the future. Well, it died a couple of weeks later, the Newton, but then a couple of weeks later, Bill Gates comes into the studio and says, I'm gonna give him about a couple of $1 million. I said, why are you gonna do that? He says, because Janet Reno's getting ready to jump all over me and I gotta keep Apple alive. So he gave him a huge infusion of cash and that brought him back. And then he came back to the studio 6 months later, he said, Art, this is the future now. It's called an iPhone. I said, well, I have to go out and get an iPhone book, an iPhone book for dummies. He says, if you have to go out and buy that book, I fail. You're supposed to pick up this phone and it works. I said, wow. But those are the kinds of things that we rub shoulders with. And I think about all the kids on the south side of Chicago, Eisenhower Elementary School, they didn't have tablets or desktop computers, but Bill Gates put computers in those classrooms in one of the poorest communities in Chicago, and those kids are doing great. And they've got scholarship money when they're ready to go to college. But we opened those doors, and we didn't want anything for that, but those kids and their mamas and their daddies are so appreciative of the technology. Now, every week, we tape a segment at NBC called Tech Trends. I'm with Charlie Wojciechowski. He's the other half of the brain trust for technology. And we had Mr. Bush in the studio. What a guy, what a guy. He got on the air and talked to several million people, and he left a very impressionable mark on our audience at Channel 5. So I'm Art Norman, Channel 5 News. I'm ready to go, Mr. Bush.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And it's great to have all the context, and it's glad to hear you happy and smiley, and it seems like you've recovered well so far. And it was just your birthday as well, so happy birthday.
Good boy, you got a good memory. And my birthday was just 2 days ago, and I just recovered from knee replacement surgery. I'm kind of like a bionic man, titanium knee. So they're going to stop me going to the airport, but that's okay.
All right, so I have a list of questions, and those questions are varied, but I've pulled out one specifically for each of you that pull on what we covered in our talk. Much of it was on the original produced piece. Some of it was cut and not able to make it. So we'll go through those. It's a question for you individually, but for the group at large as well. And, with that, not as a function of your name starting with the letter A, you are the first one, though, on the list. So we will go right back to you, Art. And, you talked about the Roseland story. Clearly, Black Lives Matter was a huge talking point. This summer is still ongoing in some cities more than others, and it's ever present in the news cycle and will probably remain so for quite some time. But you made explicit mention of how social media played a role in the Roseland community, specifically related to the pharmacists and how that system played out. And I thought it was a really kind of informative piece on how that story is probably reflective of a lot of similar stories nationwide of somewhere something similar to that happening, and social media being the reason why there might have been a solution to that problem, or at least the information getting out. So can you give us an update on that story in so much as you know it, but then also talk about how social media generally, I'd like to hear from you and everyone's perspective on how it can support and encourage and embrace social causes, but also at the same time, how do we deal with misinformation that could easily come with it? So it's a little bit of a double-barreled question, but Bernard, I'd like to start with you, as you were the one that brought it up in our piece.
Absolutely. Roseland is a very poor community on the far south side of Chicago, and it was at one point the murder capital of the world. This is a community that was talked about a year ago because they don't have hospitals nearby, ambulatory care facilities. If you're shot, hurt, maimed, or in an automobile accident in Roseland, they have to bring you all the way to Cook County Hospital downtown. That's a long way. That's what they're saying. They wanted to have some trauma centers nearby in that community, which is a devastated community, 100%, almost 100% Black. But when they had these peaceful demonstrations, those demonstrations ended around 9 o'clock at night, and then around 9:01, seems like the hooligans came out, and they went through this community, through the poorest community, and started wreaking havoc, breaking out windows at Walgreens, CVS stores, and some of the independent pharmacies. Well, when that happened, one of the pharmacists, I'm on the board of the United Negro College Fund, and one of the major contributors to UNCF is Dr. Howard Bowling, and he owns a private pharmacy. They emptied his store out. Every drug inside that facility, all the property inside his store, even the computer where he kept a database of everything, gone in a nanosecond. People came in, busted everything up, and he was like fit to be tied. So what he did was, one of the ladies, a recent graduate of the University of Illinois, her grandmother would walk to that pharmacy every day. And she said to her granddaughter, "What am I gonna do, baby? What am I gonna do?" And she says, let me look at that. So she went and started a GoFundMe page for that pharmacy, because so many people in the community would walk to that pharmacy to get their prescriptions filled. These are senior citizens, people that you might say, oh, let them take a bus and a train to get their prescriptions filled. But no, she went online. She made a GoFundMe page, and the pharmacist who was on duty said, all I need is $6,000, and because everything was covered except $6,000. Well, she went online. Next thing you know, it was $600 and $6,000. And now, last time I looked at it, it was $36,000 to put everything back together in that pharmacy. And as a result, Walgreens, that was watching all this on social media, one of the senior guy in charge of marketing for Walgreens walked in there and gave Dr. Howard Bowling a big check. And this is a pharmacy, a major pharmacy, helping out a mom and pop pharmacy in the city of Chicago. Big write-up in the Sun-Times and the Tribune about what happened there in the Roseland community, and how social media played a major part. Now today, you can walk in there. They have shutters across the windows of the store. People, they took possession of this store, the pharmacy. And so that's what I like about social media and the lady that did this, she was only 19 years old. She said, my grandmother just didn't feel like, taking a bus or a train to get a pharmacy, to get a prescription filled. But they did it, and they did it using social media. And that's the story of Roseland. Roseland is a community hard hit by crime. But, you walk by that pharmacy today, you say, gee, that really looks nice. That's a nice pharmacy. They got all the property inside, all the shelves are filled up. Everything's back to normal right now. But it happened because World Wide Web and social media, Twitter, Facebook, and the whole 9 yards, but it all happened because of a 19-year-old girl, a recent University of Illinois graduate, a star graduate of Morgan Park High School. So this is what happens in the Black community, and how we are helping those who want to help themselves. Mr. Bush.
Well, so this is, that's a really good example in a bad situation of social media obviously helping, but the inverse can easily be true, right? So can we speak a little bit about that? Obviously, Twitter's under fire. We have a presidential campaign coming up. and misinformation can easily run rampant. So does anyone have any strong opinions one way or the other on how, misinformation and the negative underside of social media can somewhat be dealt with in a meaningful way? Or is it, as soon as the cat's out of the bag, you're not getting it back in, you have to live with the positive and the negative consequences of that action, of that access?
Anyone?
Yep, you're on.
Cool. I think part of the misinformation is I don't think we can expect at all times for the social media giants to monitor all this information. We need to hold the news outlets accountable as well. Fox, CNN, everyone. They continue to use really divisive language. And I read, especially, it was posted by user experience design website, but some of the language they use in headlines, for example, police clash with protesters. And it's not a clash. They came and were monitoring, the protests. 93% of the protests were actually nonviolent, and the coverage is only covering the 7% that went poorly. On top of that, 42% of people believe that all protests are violent, which is not also true. So I think if we can, contact these journalists in some way and these news outlets and hold them accountable to write things as they are, as facts, and not in a way that incites, emotions from people, especially when they're sharing them on Facebook and Twitter.
We try our best. I just want to let you know, we try our best. If we go out to, I've seen those negative comments on Facebook, and I've seen them on Twitter, Instagram, and they're look at what they pulled down. They pulled down over 10,000 posts from Twitter because they were not true. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, they're targeting negative stories to the Black community, things that are just not true. And so we have to look at that, and thank goodness Mark Zuckerberg is pulling stuff back, as well as Twitter, Instagram, and that's a plus, because we don't need negative information. I mean, if you're saying that the virus is an afterthought, well, we know that's not true. Just look at the numbers. But these kinds of negative facts are hitting the Black community a lot faster and repetitively over and over again. But we have to be cognizant of how to screen that, and that's being done at a very high level inside the brain trust of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and the entire World Wide Web. And what do you think?
Well, is it a game of incentives? And that's really hard to change. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's beholden to a certain master, be it regulatory or just the market. And at the end of the day, if the incentives are aligned in a way that doesn't do the community the most benefit, but is aligned to do the company the most benefit, the company will oftentimes just make the decision that's in line with the company's best interests to help to the community who have to deal with the end results. And I don't know how you change that, because you can't presume that the population writ large are highly ethical, highly moral, or in line to look for what's better for the community, because that's not how necessarily everyone is wired. And so it just becomes really problematic. There's no ultimate one solution, because the incentive structure will always, in my view, kind of ultimately change all of those outcomes. If
we can incentivize the factual reporting and make those the most viral posts on Facebook and Twitter, and the incentive is actually based on if they're already scraping through these articles to find out if they're true or not, I think that would be a very useful way to incentivize writers to write down things as they are, as opposed to what creates the most clicks. Sorry for interrupting.
I mean, I'd argue a little bit that I think the cat's out of the bag a little bit, but I think a few of you have alluded to just this concept of you notice a pattern, right? It's not that one person's posting something that's not true one time, but but then that person might be given a slap on the wrist, and then they can do it again, right? And so I think part of it also is looking for those patterns of behavior. And yes, people then create new usernames and try again, and that's a different problem. But at a bare minimum, when you see people who are consistently putting out misinformation, I get there's a First Amendment issue with that, but at the end of the day, if you're yelling things that aren't true, you shouldn't be allowed to do that again and again and again once there's an established pattern. But my 2 cents.
So, Aaron, I really liked your thought about holding people accountable. Do we all feel like this next generation, this Gen Z, is starting to do that? From a very high level, I feel like they're much more aware of social issues and are calling out the BS, for lack of better terms. Do y'all share that sentiment?
I think it's getting definitely better. But I don't believe, given how emotional the country is at this point, and rightfully so, people are willing to dig in deeper. If they see something that fits their narrative, they're going to jump right in and believe it and reshare it, as opposed to, like, the other day, I have someone in my Facebook community that shared a Breitbart article that said the NBA, because of the presence of Black Lives Matter, hits all-time low in ratings for Game 5 of Lakers versus Portland. And if you know basketball, their best player wasn't playing that night. It was an elimination game, and no one was interested in watching the 1 seed versus the 8 seed when ultimately the result was going to be a win for the Lakers. But no one does that research. It's just this headline that says a narrative that fits theirs, that people don't want anything about social justice, which is not true.
Well, layering on top of this, I want to go to Aaron Files here and talk about, when we talked, you spoke about the old Nokia snake game and how that helped in Kenya with the banking industry. And that's just kind of one small example of technology, clearly not leveling the playing field, but allowing others to participate in a meaningful way, at least in an area there where there are no banks, and you needed a way to kind of bridge that divide. The question I have for you is on, examples of, or just thoughts on unintended consequences on the negative side for good intentions, for technology that has good intentions, but ultimately gets turned either by its user base. And I'd like to focus more on the user base than on the actual author, but used for nefarious or poor unintended reasons that are ultimately a negative. Can you speak at all about that? Because you spoke about how you use Uber and you can't imagine ever hailing a cab, but conversely, that might affect a lot of people's livelihoods as taxi drivers, as an example. So, can you and others speak about kind of the unintended consequences? Because as founders, as people in the tech world, maybe you're so hyper-focused on a solution, you don't realize that by creating a solution, you might be creating other downstream effects that are negative and maybe in aggregate don't outweigh you doing what you do. But we just can't be blind to the fact that there are things in our wake that might not be what we intended and that people now have to deal with.
Yeah, no, that's a huge issue with any technological change. I mean, heck, my dad drove a cab and limos, so it's really interesting that like I say that because generally speaking, I think it's true. But I think we've all been hitting on that topic that you just brought up, right? I mean, what has like social media or access, right? I was able to start Promotable in a very low cost way, and most of us are able to launch companies quickly because we have this access to new technology, right? And you're lowering barriers, which is a really good thing. But when you lower barriers, you also have someone who I think you pointed out the incentive structure, right? If it fits your narrative and you want to go mess some things up, it's the same thing as anything else. I do free events with the goal of helping people learn some basic things about data, and I get someone go Zoom bomb me with racist stuff. The intention was to lower the barrier so they didn't have to sign up for 13 things to get on. But that said, I got a bunch of people who came on, really enjoyed it, and you have one person who decides that they want to have some fun at everyone else's expense, and that's a really small example. But I think Art brought up much bigger examples that are prevalent, and you can start talking about the election and that sort of thing. You can talk to people, you can start things quickly, but if someone wants to be nefarious, when you lower barriers, the cat's out of the bag to an extent. Even though you can regulate it, there's only so much you can regulate away.
I think that's such a good point. And what we see at Prowess and what we talk a lot about is how important it is to have your own boundaries, and how important it is you are the person who is going to give that nefarious comment power or not. And what are some of the tools that we can use to label, hey, no, this does not fit in my alignment, and I'm not going to believe this or take this in. And so I think, as much as holding the journalists accountable, I think there needs to be more conversation about really helping people find and honor their own boundaries.
I actually like that a lot.
I did another good example about the press and what's happening, and we saw it in Wisconsin, when this 19-year-old boy with an AK-47 shoots two people. Shoots three, kills two, and the people in the crowd are saying, he just shot somebody. And the police wave at him and keep on going. He eventually had to turn himself in. These are some of the negative items that we in the Black community see over and over again. The young man that Dylan Ruth, who shot and killed all those people in South Carolina inside Mother Emanuel Church. Well, after he turned himself in, he asked the police, could he take him to Burger King? This is after he prayed with 9 parishioners and killed them all, and they took him to Burger King. Those kinds of stories coming out angered the Black community, and I heard it over and over again. And this is where social media has put a negative taste in our mouth. And we're seeing more and more of that. I mean, how you turn on TV and they shoot a guy 7 times in the back on camera. And it's kind of like, wow. Then you look at the crowds, the diversity in the crowds. There are more whites than blacks marching at these peaceful demonstrations. Now, there's a second tier of demonstrations that turn violent, and they're not the same people. They're 2 different people. I mean, you look at the peaceful demonstrations, and I think about 9:01, they must get a call somewhere where all the hooligans come out and they start breaking store windows and damaging stores. But the 90% of the people out there who are protesting are very nonviolent, and we know that.
Yeah. Well, moving forward here, Ashley, I want to come to you and your background and your focus is you're using technology to address a very real concern. It's a very clear market need. A lot of women that leave the workforce have a hard time going back, and clearly that's, I wouldn't say, well, maybe I would say, dominated by the fact that childbirth pulls a lot of women out of the workforce and they need to go back in. I would be curious to hear if that actually is kind of the leading factor of the group that you serve. But in addition to that, and that is your business model and that is your focus, have you thought about expanding on that? Not necessarily to the male counterpart, but there are other groups. There are, disability focused groups that could clearly, have a helping hand getting into the workforce with things being remote now. I think the barriers to entry to a lot of lines of work maybe have been taken down. And so I'm curious how you see not only your company, but technology as a whole addressing these market needs. Because a fully able-bodied woman that has a good background and a good career, that's obviously a different pathway to someone that has some type of disability that they need to wrestle with. But the need is still prevalent, the need is still there. But with technology, the barrier is much lower. So I'd be curious if you could speak about that a little bit, or if anyone else has insight as well on how technology can help ease the pathway for a large swath of population, because I think the nature of work is fundamentally shifting.
So I love this. You absolutely nailed it with other groups, that this is real, that technology really helps get back into work or get work, period. And to answer your question of why women are leaving the workforce, 43% of women leave the workforce to raise children. That is a crazy amount. Now, due to COVID and the lack of childcare, of the current women who are in the workforce, 30% are considering leaving. That is a massive population.
Wow.
Right.
I can't believe that.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And then we turn around and we look at our Fortune 500 leadership and we wonder why there's only 1 woman on the board. Well, that's why. Because if a woman is out of the workforce for just 3 years, she loses 37% of her compensation power and is set back not just the quote unquote 2 years that she was out, but another 10 because of the stigma.
Wow.
And so what I wanted to do with Prowess was take a look at the hiring process. And today, how it works is You get a ton of applications for a role, and typically recruiters or hiring managers, they look at skills and expertise. And that's where they cut all of the resumes and then go through those for screening calls. And that's when you start getting to know the person, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, etc. I want to turn that on its head. And that's what we're doing at Prowess, and making these soft skills, the communication skills, the empathy, the negotiation, all skills that women are developing while they are out with their children. And how do we make those just as important as the hard skills while we are in the hiring process? And so why I think that's so important, and the other group that we're going to go after eventually, is the autistic population. There is such untapped talent in that population who really, they want to contribute. They wish they had a part. Now that we have this remote work world, they have more of an opportunity, but their learning style is different. Their communication style is different. And the technology that we built allowed us to make the team and that person compatible. So we're going to next start with probably the autistic population, and then hearing impaired.
All right. Well, that's extremely interesting. I mean, it's obviously a huge need, and we wish you well. And so, in terms of kind of rollouts, is there anything that you'd like to let us know, or the population at large know, about kind of how you want to tackle those added groups? Do you have a timeline in mind, or is it very much now in the conceptual phase about figuring out how to kind of layer them into what you're already doing?
The latter. So we are going to focus on women. That's the heart and soul of our company, and more specifically our community. That is one huge piece of the magic with Prowess, is when we were going out and talking to women and asking them what their barriers to reentering the workforce, they said that their network was shot. And so we gave them a place where they can not only get upskilling, confidence, a network of like-minded people, and a job pool. And so that interaction and those connections made and bonds made is what really the spirit of Prowess is, and celebrating that feminine energy, if you will.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. So now I'd like to move on to you, Erin Fazulak, and talk about this concept that you brought up earlier in our talk, which was how the nature of remote work kind of blurs and makes problematic the traditional boundaries between kind of work-life balance. They don't necessarily exist. There's seemingly, in many cases, for managers, an expectation that you're always on. And that clearly is not good for anyone's mental health, especially if you're in a subordinate role. And being home and not in a workplace presents a whole bunch of other challenges, not only distractions, but you might have a dog, you might have kids, you're trying to juggle with a school schedule. I mean, there's a litany of things there. So I was wondering if you and others can kind of expand on how, in this new norm, and COVID's an extreme example, ultimately, hopefully we will deal with that, but nevertheless, we're probably not going back to the norm as we knew it pre-COVID anyway. So in your ed tech headspace, kind of how do you see the right type of training happening of managers to deal with this new reality, such that the correct boundaries can not only be assumed, but also owned by the population?
Sure. Yeah. Well, to follow up on what we talked about, is that I've had another observation, which is I've had 3 friends that have been overworked and now are quitting their jobs because we're seeing a lot of layoffs, and then they're asking people who they cannot see how hard they're working and how long they're working, how many hours they're putting in, and they're getting overworked and leaving. So my only I guess I would beg leadership. I mean, it has to come from leadership to set these boundaries and set these rules that say, these are our hours, these are when you can contact people, as well as giving the people themselves, your employees, the ability to define their boundaries as well. So on top of the fact that there is a lack of disconnection when you're in your home, when you're always connected to Wi-Fi, and you really don't even realize that the lines have been blurred between, I'm working and not working. We have to have leadership come forward and step forward and say, it is not healthy for our team to be working 24/7, or to always feel like if their phone goes off, they have to answer. So I think, Slack and Gmail and various other software collaboration tools have the ability for you to set, work hours. And I would really urge leadership, if you want to maintain, a healthy workforce and retain your employees, to set those guidelines so that people aren't, overworking themselves.
Aaron, I really love that. And so we're talking to leaders and hiring managers all day, every day. And they're saying the exact same thing, that, hey, their employees are overworked. And so what we decided to do is, out there in the world, there are all of these courses on how you work remote, but a lot of people aren't taking a step back and saying, how do you show empathy in the workforce in this remote world?
Yes.
And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about, is how do you own that empathy? How do you show that to people? How do you create and maintain the relationships now that you're miles away, 2 screens away, etc.? So we're rolling that out in the next month.
Yeah, it's also up to people to understand, hey, like sometimes it's a fire drill, it's an emergency, we need it. But there's a border between, when is it not an emergency? Like, I have a bad habit of texting people well after hours, but usually I follow that up with, please don't respond to this until tomorrow. It's just, I need to get this out before I forget. But I don't expect someone at 8:30 to be on the phone saying, do not get on Slack. I'm like, no. Like, you shouldn't even be looking at this right now. It's definitely not an emergency. We'll talk tomorrow.
Yeah, I guess it all comes down to a heightened level of communication skills. The communication skill is very different now. You can't easily read people because you're not seeing them in person to read unaudible cues. Right?
We all look like we have bad head, but it doesn't mean that I've been overworked. It just means I'm working from home. No, I've been working way too much lately. Yeah. I don't have bad head though.
Well, yes, and so with that, I want, it's a slight pivot, but it is related to all of this, and so this is kind of a group focused question, and it's around this concept that Betsy was talking about, which is convergence, and the idea we're all in the tech space, we're all tech founders, we all use technology all the time, and I wanted to kind of pick at this idea of convergence as, is it creating, and it might not be either or, but is it creating brand new products through the integration of already existing products, but you're just baking these ingredients in different ways to come up with something completely new? Or is it seen as somewhat kind of derivative when you're just using all of these existing pieces of information out there to then come up with something? You're not really inherently creating something new. And I ask that just to get your perspective. I don't think it's inherently a bad and or a good thing. But it seems to me that in the tech world, we always layer on what came before, and maybe that's just an age-old truism anyway, but at the same time, are things like Cameo new? Is Slack new? Are they really new? Or are they just kind of, playing on an idea that already exists and thus they're derivative, but they've hit on something important that allows them to grow at a rate that wasn't seen before? I'd just be curious on your idea of that, because we all wrestle with it, because invariably the barrier to entry in the tech world is quite low. We can play with a lot of things. So I'd be curious to hear your take on this overall idea of convergence and, its good and bad elements and kind of the ramifications of it.
I think one interesting thought there, I think it's somewhere in between, although I don't think that something, just because it is derivative, means that's a bad thing. Like, Slack is good, but it's basically Gmail, it's basically Skype, and all those other things that we used to use. I think sometimes the thing was there, but then I guess when times change, right, it's like all of a sudden, like, everyone likes Zoom now, but we've been using Google Hangouts forever, right? And so it's like, all of a sudden now this is something that feels new, despite the fact that it has been around for quite some time, and that's okay though, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I think we all build on something that someone else does. Especially in tech, the internet is an example of that, right? Created by DARPA, and now you give it to the private sector, and we create this thing that now all of a sudden everyone needs.
So I actually think it is all brand new. And reason being, I think that now more than ever, and there's actually data behind this, people make decisions based on emotion 99% of the time. And what these companies who are, let's say, taking old technology and using it in a different way, they are creating a brand. They're creating a mission. They are creating a community of people who are rallying around them. And that's new. And I think that that's really important. There's a lot of people out there who build cool tech, but if you can't apply it, then what's the point? Mm-hmm. And so to me, it is new.
I, coming from like, I guess the background of user experience design, and Montano, you might have even gone through this with some of our students, is the concept of convergent and divergent thinking. So you state the problem, and then you try to use, logical progression of thinking to come up with a solution. But on top of that, you need to do divergent thinking where you say, okay, here's the problem. What are a million different ways we can solve this? And by doing so, you can come up with the best answer and actually unleash creativity. Neither one is right or wrong. It could be that convergent thinking comes up with the best solution, but by using divergent thinking, you're actually able to really unleash the human capacity for creativity and sometimes come up with something that's really, really new and novel.
Oh, that's great. Art, thanks for joining back in. We were just talking about the idea of technology and convergence and the leveraging of old technology into creating something new, and just having an open conversation discussing if in fact it was a new thing or not. And given your background and knowing many noted individuals, would be curious about your take as well on the idea that all four of us here are tech founders, and we're leveraging already existing technology in ways that we think is novel and interesting, and thus creating a new product that has a huge market need. We wouldn't be here if others prior to us did not deploy certain pieces of technology that we found interesting ways to utilize. We're not coding things from scratch to create something novel that has never existed before in thought or in application. But in your background, knowing a lot of these early technology leaders, what is your opinion on the examples that they set forth and the thought that we're in a constant situation of recycling old ideas, but for new or brand new applications, or not? What are your thoughts there on this idea of convergent versus divergent trends within the technology space, where the barrier to entry is low, we're limited by our imagination, but how it ultimately end results in products that we could push on the market?
Well, I just want to let you know that I go all the way back to when the C:\/ was the way to get on the World Wide Web. If you remember that, those are people who were in college level hopping on the World Wide Web, and there was no graphical user interface, but we were communicating using that technology. And if you were in college, you knew all about it. You know how to get online, how to talk to somebody in another country, but there were no graphics. It was all C:\/ and a lot of little funny looking characters, something called AutoExec, config sys. Those are the things that were happening. But right now, there's a new way of getting these young people involved. And at Rainbow Push, Reverend Jesse Jackson and Judge Greg Mathis, they're using Mark Zuckerberg's money. And they're doing coding classes every Saturday morning. And I just did a story on that. The fact that these kids are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. They're sitting in a classroom learning how to write code for tomorrow's technology. And these kids are so smart. You just think about the learning curve. And, I remember when I got into it, it took me a while. I was learning something called Fortran. And it was like index cards, and you had to have little punch holes in it. But these kids are now learning something totally different, but the same concept. They're writing code for programs that actually run themselves. And these kids are actually thinking about forming their own companies. And these are 12-year-olds, and they're learning this new technology. I mean, it's advanced from the days when we started, but they're into it. And it's kind of like they say, you've got the money, you've got the grades to go to college, but you don't have the money. Well, Zuckerberg's money came to Rainbow Push, and Judge Greg Mathis and the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. are actually implementing those programs. They get a lot of these and professors who are out there teaching on Saturday mornings, and they're teaching these young Black minds how to get ahead. Now, these kids are coming from neighborhoods where there is no computer in the house. You know what I mean? If they want to hop on the World Wide Web, they have to go to Carter G. Woodson Library and do their homework. find out. And they said, well, Mr. Norman, what did you do when you wanted to find out something about anything? Did you have Google? I said, no, we didn't have Google back in the day. Something called the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, but you had to go to the library. If I wanted to find out something about open heart surgery and who pioneered that technology for open heart surgery, I had to go to the library, go to the Dewey Decimal System and look up the information, and they would give you a card. And you go to this Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, and you can find out everything. And I found the best information about open heart surgery. Dr. Benjamin Banneker, a product of the city of Chicago, started a hospital on the south side of Chicago, and he pioneered open heart surgery, and now it's used all over the world. But the point is, back when I was in high school, I learned about it. There was no Google, but we had Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. But today, our kids know Google. So it's a different flavor, but we're learning, we're moving ahead step by step, but the technology is different, but the concept is the same.
Sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think convergent thinking and learning the foundations allows you to be creative. So we're at this incredible place where a lot of the work's been done. People could learn to code and design, in a short period of time, at least at a fundamental level. And I think we need to think, it goes back to one of your bigger questions about social media and the platforms. You can't just create a new thing by connecting two things without thinking about the repercussions of them in the real world. And I think if we go back to when Facebook was created, all right, we want to create a thing using two different technologies that connect people. What does that mean if everyone's connected in the world? What problems could that cause? So I think we need to ask designers and developers to think a little deeper about the things they're creating and farther into the future about which problems would arise so they can build the platform to avoid those.
Yeah. And I'd like to end this conversation with a pretty big, I guess you'd call it elephant in the room, and that is you're only able to partake in this conversation if you have access, right? I mean, if you don't have a smartphone, you don't have a computer, you don't have access to the internet, the digital divide is real. You can go, I guess, if you are in a good metropolitan area, to your local library and access it there if you have no other option. But you're only really able to partake in this conversation and the ramifications of it if you're even able to access technology in the first place. And a lot of that clearly is just a hardware and logistical conversation to have. And maybe it's a conversation best had by governments, and governments could be swayed in either one direction. Either they're motivated to empower everyone to have access, or they're very much persuaded not to give everyone access because they don't want them to be empowered for other reasons. So what are your perspectives there on yes, people might be creating great and laudable pieces of technology that help them, but if most people that need to be helped can't even access it for one reason or another, you're creating an answer in search of a question, unfortunately, because the people that could really use it don't even have the ability to access that work. So do you have any thoughts on the digital divide as it currently exists, and maybe kind of thoughtful ways in which that question could start to be tackled? It's a very large and broad question, obviously, but what are your thoughts around it? I'd be curious to hear.
Well, I know we had Andy Grove in the studio, and one of the things that he was really pushing, he wanted the technology to broaden its base to third world countries. Africa, he wanted to get the technology and the World Wide Web to Africa, to areas where there is no electricity. So he had a big challenge. So he found these laptops using the people at the technology at Hewlett Packard. There was like a wind up thing on the side. You could wind it up and it would generate enough electricity for you to actually hop on the World Wide Web and actually use the graphical interface of your laptop and get on the World Wide Web. Now, who are these young people in Africa using this tech? These are young people, they're 12, 13, 14 years old, but they're on the World Wide Web. They're using Andy Grove, his technology. He's the founder of Intel, and he's got a lot of money, but he wanted to give it a lot of it back. And he came into our studio, talked about how his staff is reaching out to third world countries in Africa and getting them on the World Wide Web. And I said, wow, that's amazing that he can do that. and talk about. He talks the talk, but he walks the walk, and he's doing a wonderful job. I have nothing but kind things to say about Andy Grove, founder of Intel computer chips.
Anyone else have thoughts on the digital divide? It's obviously a big topic, but I think that for democracy to work and work well, it requires participation, and for that participation, ultimately, it's going to be defined by who has access and who doesn't, and the internet and the things that we create ultimately are going to be the tools that they use.
I had to do a quick internet search, but I cheated a little bit. But 352,000 cell phones are disposed of each day. So I've been across a few organizations that recycle cell phones, and that technology, we buy a new iPhone sometimes every 2 years, 1 year, 3 years, and that incremental improvement is incremental, and the technology of a year ago is still really useful. So I would just urge people to donate their technology that they're not using anymore.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, this has been really, really helpful, thoughtful, and insightful. I thank you all.
No, before you leave, I want to ask you the same question. Mr. Montana Bush, what do you see as far as the digital divide from your perch on the worldwide, from your perch at listening to all us? Yeah,
well, I think from at a global view, which is kind of, it is very pompous to take this global view, but at the end of the day, society benefits from mass participation, but the people in power want to be very cautious with who they empower, under them in any kind of nation state. But I think that the greater good for the greater amount of people happens when people are engaged. And so I do think there should be, at every level, a national response to closing the digital divide such that more people can participate. And at that point, the sea levels will rise. Now, granted, you'll get a lot of voice of dissension. You'll have a lot of conflicting pieces of information out there because you're allowing more voices to be heard. But I think through that process, the greater good ultimately will result, so long as it's rolled out in a way that is thoughtful. And therein lies, the devil's in the details, of course. But I do think that education, for example, is massively underfunded, and that's a problem. I think the nature of education, as it currently exists, needs to be radically rethought, and COVID will just kind of make that case at a much more quicker pace than ever before, just because of social distancing, forced or otherwise. So, for me, I think there's a greater good to be had, but do we have the motivated people in power to make that happen? That's always an open question. And it comes back to the thoughts of incentives earlier on in the conversation. I think the incentive-based structure is not aligned with that happening well. So it's up to a lot of well-meaning people to do well-meaning things, like an organized, focused, recyclable campaign of slightly discarded tech that is still really functional could be a huge asset. But it doesn't seem to me that government is going to solve that problem, though I think government ultimately in the big picture ought to. I don't think their incentives are such that they will. So it's up to people like us that are in the tech space or otherwise to make that happen. So that's my overall view. I think that
good job, nice job, Mr. Bush. Very good.
But yeah, and that's why we do Tech for Good. I mean, it's very easy to talk about the bad side of technology. Cyberbullying is very real. People that are now TikTok famous, Instagram famous, they're teenagers and they're dying because of the pressure that is put on them because of this new, social craze that came out. To be honest with you, a teenage version of me would think is stupid, but I'm not a teenager now, right? So there are bad things that clearly can happen. Bullying, clearly, top of the list. Misinformation, not too far behind, I imagine. And you even have things like the dark web, which is clearly bad for a whole bunch you don't need to go into, right? But you can also think of all the good. I think in aggregate, we're better off for it. But it is a dicey proposition on how to manage it so that the bad side doesn't overtake the good. And I don't think you can have the good without the bad. So to think that we can eradicate those bad things, I think is the wrong question to ask, because just as a function of what we have, that's always going to exist. And that just then puts even more pressure on the people in power to be able to do the things necessary to try to tone down, those negative aspects that do exist.
Great job, Mr. Bush.
Mr. Information's number one. Every sci-fi movie starts with no one listening to the scientist.
Like, I think like the summary I think is like what you said earlier, Montana. It was like, at the end of the day, it's good to empower people. It's good to democratize data, democratize access, but it should also be when we talk about the rollout, it's great to fund that, but we also need to fund education properly. And it's not just money, right? I think so much of it is also just like the direction of what you choose to support and all that. But I mean, I think the research also shows that the more people who are actually even basic education is so relevant to just basic decision making, right? We all need to know how a bill becomes a law, what a mitochondria is, like all these little things that seem meaningless when you're in school, but now you're like, oh, that's actually super relevant.
I know and I wanted to say something about the lack of women involved in technology. And one of the things that we noticed at NBC, every time we did a tech trends segment, I would get a note in my inbox at Channel 5 NBC from one of the line producers. Now, the people who produce the actual 30-minute newscast are women, most of them. 90% of our staff that produce these shows are women. And I'd get this note, Charlie and I would get a note that said, too bad a woman told you about that technology. And, you know, I thought about it, and then we started querying Verizon, the folks at the all the technology companies from Microsoft, and said, do you have a female spokesperson? He said, sure, we have plenty of them. I said, well, send them on this way. And now if you look at our technology segments, we have a lot of women involved, but for some reason, no one was thinking about that. And, you know, and we had Jane Pauley in the news when she was in town for a journalism seminar, and she was looking at our show one Saturday morning. She said, there's so many women involved in technology. That was refreshing, Art. And I think of Jane Pauley because she was the first woman hired at Channel 5 back in the day. You know, when we went to Indianapolis to get her to anchor the news in Chicago, sitting next to Floyd Calvert. But she was a pioneer back in the day. So she came into this newsroom at the same time that Greg Gumbel came to the newsroom. So we had a lot of Jim Tillman came to the newsroom. A lot of people pioneered that stuff, but she was the first woman anchoring the news over at Channel 5 in the evening. So it was a big plus, but we need to do more to get women involved in the technology as well. So I'm so glad that you have a young lady on our panel today. Nice job, Mr. Bush.
Well, no, and I call out as well. Unfortunately, Anna was on earlier from Spark, but she is in California, and subsequently the wildfires shut down her connections. So she
that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yes, that was unfortunate. And then Betsy Ziegler, CEO of 1871, had a conflict that came up last minute, so we couldn't involve her as well.
That's a powerful lady.
Others, you know, trying to drown out all the white male faces as well, but unfortunately they couldn't join on the call.
Well, and real quick, Art, I wanted to say something. So as I said before, 43% of women leave the workforce to raise their children. The second reason why specifically women in tech leave is because 1/3 are victims of sexual harassment.
Wow.
Yeah. And so if you think about that, of course, women are going to be looking for a way out. Now, let me say that is horrendous. In no way are we men bashing, not the case. It's just a fact. And then going back to education, our gender roles in our society start from birth, really. There was this study that was done for women on little girls, and half of them were told, hey, you are doing science, and the other half were told, you are a scientist. And which of those two do you feel more secure in? And it was doing science, because even little girls, when they think of scientists, they think of men. And so back to the whole education thing, even education where it's not like 1 + 2 = 3, but education about those societal issues that we have truly is key.
Well, there's something I'd like to throw in there, and this was a side conversation I had with Betsy, but it's also known, if you have diversity among a table of decision makers, you end up with a better result. And I think,
Yeah.
Aaron, you know this from design thinking as well. It doesn't matter so much, gender changes, but just different perspectives, station in life, rich versus poor, ethnicity changes, all of those things ultimately matter. And it is proven time and time again, the literature is there, that if you have that diversity of thought and background around a table, noodling and wrestling on a problem, you end up with a better result. And knowing that, why are many times, C-suite leadership, the faces of me, white males? We might all be very smart, but we don't know what we don't know. And it's not necessarily our fault that we don't have all these shared experiences in other environments. But if you were to solve for that, then you're ultimately putting yourself and the company in a much better position. But yet people don't want to lose their station. People want to think that they're the best and brightest and they know everything. And because they don't know what they don't know, why are they not smart enough to cover their backsides by having different people and different experiences around that table is somewhat beyond me, because from a complete analytical perspective, it will result in a better decision and that makes everyone look good. And yet the incentive structures are such, again, that those changes aren't made. And maybe that there's good examples of them clearly it working out for the better. I'm curious to hear if anyone has a take on that. But yet kind of changing those norms are very, very difficult things to do.
I think I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, and when I come home, I have those tough conversations with people that might not agree with me. And if empathy doesn't work, I try to speak in economics, and I believe inequity is not good economics when it comes to developing this country from the ground up. So that you get a more diverse opinion, which appeals to more maybe customers. You get a more points of view to come up with a better solution, whether you're building a technology product or a service. So there's a million reasons why there should be equity in this country. And I hope that your platform and our platforms can continue to try to push for that.
All right. Well, I guess on that note,
I did have one question for Ashley. So what are some of the solutions to the problem? Because I think about, if it's, you said on average 3 years, people are out of the workforce taking care of a child. What are some of the solutions? Because that's a long time to recover just from an experience standpoint. Share, like flexible working, giving the opportunity for the other spouse to take care of the child and switch on. And what are some of the solutions your team is proposing?
Absolutely. So you nailed it with the flexible work. That is key. And reason being, and what we're seeing is, I thought it was going to be all women coming to us who are returning to the workforce. It's actually 50% are women who want to have children soon, but know if they leave the workforce completely, that they're going to have this stigma and will lose compensation power. So what we're able to have them do is find flexible work and maintain something on their resume. So A, they're not out of work, B, their network doesn't get rusty, and so on. But I think what also is really key, and we need quite frankly, your help on this. There is a difference between being an ally for gender equality and being a champion for gender equality. And I think that being an ally is great. You stand up next to someone and say, yes, this is great. I believe in this. This is awesome. What we need are more people who invite us to the table, more people who bring a chair for us, more people who are asking us to be on these panels like this, so that our perspective is shared. And
Absolutely.
so I want to say thank you, Montana, for inviting me and the other ladies
I agree.
who couldn't be there, because we need people like you to give us a bit of that spotlight.
That's right.
All right. Well, I thank you so much. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your day and for spending time. I know it took a while to get all the interviews in and the produced piece. And, this will inform what TechnoEvil 3 will ultimately become. And I will follow up with you. And should anyone have questions of me to any of you, I will forward those on as well. My job here, as I see it, is really to just be a forum and to allow for conversations to happen. Clearly, I have a little bit of an agenda, but more often than not, I really just want to give a voice to others around this topic, and really those that maybe share different opinions that I do as well, just so that we can have a really well-rounded discussion. That is the goal. That's why we also have on the Techno Evil website, we have a running news ticker. I go through and I curate news, and a lot of the stuff I post there, when I post from reputable news sources, are maybe views and opinions that maybe I don't share, but that's irrelevant, right? It talks all about this space, and I'll cover your news articles as well. But before we get up, any other last shots you'd like to get out to the audience? This thing will be recorded and shared, and people will see it. So is there anything last piece that you would like people to leave your last impression of you to them?
I feel like Art should go first. He kills everything.
No, I appreciate what we're doing tonight. The dialogue is so important. We must find a way of bridging the digital divide to all communities. I was up in Andersonville the other day, and there's a great Native American community of Chicago where they call it the Native, well, where they're part of a global program, which is the International Association of Black Journalists. We have brought them in as Native American journalists, and they need a lot of stuff. So we're trying to help them as much as we can. But the Andersonville, they have newspapers and things like that. We just want to integrate them more so into the mainstream media. These are Native Americans, and they're catching hell. But they're smart, articulate, knowledgeable, and they just need a helping hand, and we're trying to do that for them. Hispanic communities on top of it. The National Association of Hispanic Journalists here in Chicago, big on that. The former president of that organization works with me at Channel 5, Natalie Martinez. We're trying to help everybody along the way. Some of the people are so young, but they're thirsty for knowledge, and we're trying to get them excited. That's our goal, to get young people, people who are outside the fringe, excited and want to come in and meet people like Mr. Montana Bush. You're the man.
Tell my kids. They don't believe that they're 8 years old. So yeah, Ashley, Aaron, any last thoughts before we close the session?
Yeah, my last thoughts are, I think sadly there's a lot of wrong in the world, and that can be paralyzing. And a lot of people don't know what to focus on or how to help. And so you just sit there and unfortunately do nothing. And I think what's really important right now is to look deep down and figure out what you're passionate about. And it can be something small. But when you're passionate about something and you want to make a change, it won't feel like work. It won't feel like volunteering. It will feel like you are in your flow, being the best person that you can be, doing what you were made to do. And I think that it's really important to give yourself permission to really zero in on that, instead of feeling like the weight of the world is on you and you need to help out every single one of these causes.
I agree with that. I think there's always like one little thing you can do. I think one thing I think we can all agree on is, I think Art touched on earlier, but being able to, of course, break down barriers, but I think ultimately put people in a position to be successful. And that's like
right.
the things I think that drove me to start Promotable, but also just in general, it's
absolutely
like this thing where lots of people are close, like right there. I mean, I went to community college, right? Then I got a bunch of good logos afterwards, but there's a lot of really smart people that need like that extra little bit. I mean, like same thing here. It's like you can take a data class, but if you don't know what you're looking for, it's not going to help you. But if you can say, hey, I want to do this to get this kind of job, and I can, I always tell my friends, hey, go into LinkedIn, reach out to this person, we'll have a conversation with you. That sparks an idea, that sparks a conversation. And you're able to do so much more from having that conversation. Of course, it goes back to access, because you have to have a computer to reach out on LinkedIn. But that's, I think, why we're having this discussion. So I think it's really, really good.
Yeah, I try to encourage myself and friends and other leaders and entrepreneurs, problem solvers, people of influence with power, to in a year of so much pain, where you can feel anger in the morning, depression, sadness, even misery, to take a second and be very emotionally intelligent and self-aware, and realize and feel those feelings, and then try to move forward with what you have and try to solve the problems that we have today, which is really challenging, but I know I try to do it every morning, some days better than others.
Well, good. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time. And hopefully everyone watching this appreciates the time and effort that everyone put into putting this out there. And we'll continue to do this. Next year will be another event, and hopefully we will be seeing COVID in our rearview mirror, and that will change the landscape.
I can't wait for that.
Me too.
All of us, right? But again, thank you everyone for taking your time. And I really appreciate the thoughtful responses, and I look forward to remaining in touch. And this has started a friendship, and there's more to come. So thank you all very much.
Yes,
Thank you and good night.
Everyone.
Thank you, Montana.
Thank you.
See y'all. Bye.